sales minus cost, print that out, run that, sorry, it'll give you, oops, sales, oh sorry, sales, oh no, actually let me just put sales, sales minus cost, same thing, right? So every time, if let's say sales changes, right? If let's say now it's like 3,000, you know, it's still the same thing, right? So it's a similar thing that you're doing on your calculator in that it's still the same function, right? I mean the same use as a calculator, right? You're still typing this, but what you've just done now is that you've just, remember how I told you that there are also letters in Python, right? It's the same thing. Just think of this as a huge calculator and you're doing the same plus or minus thing, but now what you're doing now is just, instead of now having to type every time here, 3000 minus 500, you've just given this a name, right? So this is what we call a variable, right? As mentioned before, a variable, something you have to remember. That there are many types of variables. I have it written down here on this part. You can how to name, sorry, not, yeah, how to name a variable is, first of all, it must always be a letter. Start with a letter or an underscore. Underscore is this thing. I think everyone knows what an underscore is. Yeah, a letter or an underscore. This is fine, right? Next thing is that it cannot start with a number, so you can't have this. You can't have two costs. This will, if you do that, it won't run. It's yeah. It can't be a number. Uh, it can't be a number, and it can only contain uh, oh yeah, it can only contain A to Z, both capital or small letter, and 0 to 9, and this underscore as mentioned before, and they're also case sensitive. So let me show you something, right? So this sales and this sales 2000, these are different things. So if I put here sales, right, and run it, you see it would be, oh sorry, let me move this to cost here. If I put this sales here, you see now it's 1500, but if I put this as a small letter, now it would be 2500. So be very careful when you're naming your variables, but it's always encouraged that whenever you're naming your variables, you use names that are meaningful. So for example, it wouldn't make sense to call this like cost when you actually mean profit, and profit when you actually mean sales or something like that, right? That can confuse you. So it's always good to have very meaningful names for what basically this means. So just as a recap, I don't know yeah, just as a recap, just think of the same thing that you do with the calculator. You're putting in values. You have different variables. So you have numbers here, and you have the operator here, and you have another number, and you press equals, and then it's giving you a result. Same thing that we're doing here, right? Now, the the different, this is not the only type of operations that you can do with Python, right? This is just one of them, right? I mean, you can also do plus, the same thing with the calculator. You can do plus, you can do, this thing is taking a bit of time, my Wi-Fi is going a bit slow. You can do, times, program finished. You can also do times is the star thing. You can do division, yeah, and for a full comprehensive list of these things, check also these this guy's Python operators. I think I have it up to here. Yeah, Python operators. Just check this with your school, guys. So whenever you want to do a calculation, you can basically do that. So now I guess you're wondering that, oh okay, so then is that all? It's just this, is that basic? No, actually, you can do more things with Python, right? This is just one of the functions you can do, right? Sometimes you uh, you want to do something more complex than this, right? Than just calculating different numbers or something. Maybe sometimes you want to check if the cost, or if a certain figure is, let's say, above 500 or it's below 500. Sometimes maybe you want to uh, you know assign, store data or something like that. So there are many different operations that you can do in Python. So it's the same thing as a calculator. Just think of it as you're doing operations, right? But then Python is doing more than this. I mean, you can do this. You can do with numbers and all these things. These are just number operations. You can also, work with words. That actually brings me to the next part, which is data types. I have it here. Data types, right? So you have strings, basically. You have, numeric types. You have integers, floats, complex. Don't be intimidated by these terms. They're not that. Yeah, they're just. I'll explain them after this. But you have, strings. You have numeric types, you have sequences, these are lists, you have mapping types, this I have to remind myself what these two guys are, but then you have booleans, and you also have binary. But for just the sake of simplicity, for this tutorial I'm going to focus on the the key ones that you need in any program language. Has a boolean. A boolean is true or false. It has a sequence of some sort, like a list of data, and you have these numbers and you have strings. So your question now, I'm guessing, is how do you use these things, right? So I'm going to start with strings, right? So a string basically is the same concept here of sales, right? The same concept here of naming different things, right? String is just like, how sales here was 2000, right? String is now just letters. Now you're just working with letters, right? So sales, let's say I can say, yes, we had sales, right? We had sales. This is a string, basically. This is a string. Uh, yeah, this is basically a string. Now, what do I use this for? Uh, for example, here, you can say print, did we have sales plus sales, right? Uh, did we have sales plus sales? You know, run. Did we have sales? Yes, we had sales, right? I mean, you get to appreciate this more when, uh, as we go deeper. I'm going to give you a very complex example with data that will be applicable to your learning. But for now, just get this. So in the same way that you had a calculator that you were mixing different values, right? It's the same thing with strings, right? Strings are just letters. Anything that you see that, if you want to indicate that something is a string, right? You just basically have to put these two things. They're called, I don't know, apostrophes or something like that. But that's how you basically indicate that something is a string, right? So I'll explain it deeper of why we use these things, but we'll still just think of the same concept of a calculator that we're still, putting in different numbers, and but now we're working also with letters, right? The next type is numeric types. These are numbers, integers, floats, and complex. I don't know, this thing, they have very complex, not complex, but complicated names, but ideally it's just the same thing. An integer is just a number, like this is an integer, right? A float now is like, a float is when you just do a 0.3 or something. Let me just check if I'm right. Example. Yeah, this is an integer. A float, yeah, a float is just like when you just have a point, you know. A complex, I think, is when you have both, but I'm not gonna go deep into this, you know. But yeah, I think just for now, just know string and integer. String is just letters, and this is numbers, and this is just a point. Then you have a list. A list is but no, I think let's just keep it there for now. I'll explain that now later. So same thing as a calculator is that you have different operations, you're adding different numbers. So, you know 2000 minus 500, same thing with Python, right? But now we're just naming them, right? We're just naming them so that every time we have a different number, we don't have to re-enter the same value. Or if, let's say, this sales is connected to an actual sales figure, we don't always have to like rewrite the same instruction over and over again. So yeah, this is it for this part. I'll continue in the next.